Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Land Commander Gulf War 3 update. Today's update is for March 21st. We didn't do an update yesterday. I had wanted to, but between life and just all the dynamic things going on in this ever more spicy war, I did not get a chance to do so. Now, real quick, I want to make a correction from my last video when we were discussing the amphibious ready group that is being deployed to the 5th Com area of responsibility. I had said it was the Iwo Jima amphibious ready group. That is incorrect. It is in fact the Tripoli amphibious ready group. The Iwo Jima ARG is currently actually in the Caribbean, participating in operations down there. The big difference between the two ARGs is really the center of the task force. So the Iwo Jima is a WASP class amphibious assault ship, so it has both aviation capability in the term of F-35Bs and other rotary wing assets, but also has that well deck that I was describing last time, where you can use floating tanks essentially to move mina material from ship to shore. The Tripoli is in fact an America class assault vessel, which sacrifices the well deck for enhanced aviation capabilities in the form of bigger hangar bays, maintenance facilities, etc. So while the Tripoli amphibious ready group, which is still making its way to the 5th Com AOR and should be there within a matter of days, cannot send Marines over the water to the shore, they can use their aviation assets to do so, specifically the MV-22 Osprey tilt rotor aircraft. So I just wanted to make a correction there, kind of embarrassing, but I wanted to get that out of the way first. Second, we're going to start here with just a little quote from the Israeli energy minister. This is in response to the recent Iranian strike on the oil refinery in Haifa, or the petroleum refinery in Haifa. Just an update on that too. It sounds like the refinery, while heavily damaged, is still producing some quantity of refined petroleum products. I don't know exactly how many or what that quantity is. But the facility is still running to some degree. And this is pretty common. If you look at, say, the strikes the Ukrainians have been making on Russian oil and gas infrastructure, refineries, what have you. It is rare that the whole facility is just gone in one strike and completely incapacitated. These are large facilities, and while you can do a lot of damage to them, because of course they're filled with flammable hydrocarbons and hydrocarbon byproducts, it is not necessarily going to be the case that you hit it with 1 or 2 strikes and boom, the whole thing's gone. Maybe the Iranians will follow up with more strikes. We'll see. But the Iranian energy minister said this. He said, for every 1 building the Iranians strike, we will strike, the Israelis, 100 Iranian buildings. Now, yes, this is just one minister, one quote, but I think it fits with the theme that I've been hitting at, that this war will not end based upon Trump or the United States' decisions about how long to remain kinetically engaged or how far to go with their kinetic operations. Like I said, Trump could turn this war off tomorrow. Israel would continue its campaign. We're sort of waging different wars, even though we're allies. I also think here's a good lesson for life. If you're gonna go to war and you know it's gonna probably be a pretty heavily navalized conflict, like, I don't know, war in the Gulf tends to be, maybe the ally, especially you only got one coming with you, maybe you can bring one along that has like a real deal blue water navy that could come help you. Because while the Israelis have a navy that does some things in the Mediterranean and some submarines, they are not a blue water, away from home game, power projection navy. It's just not what they bring to the table. So they can't really help us with this situation, over in the Strait. Anyway, I just think that's really important to keep in mind, that there are a lot of actors going in this conflict. All of them get a say, all of them get a vote, and the Israelis are definitely prosecuting their own conflict with their own set of objectives, which, we're gonna dovetail real quick here to, the newest expansion of this conflict, the northwest salient of Gulf War 3, if you will, which is the recent Israeli ground incursions into southern Lebanon. Information remains kind of hard to get out of there. There's been a lot of efforts clearly to lock information down, to limit the flow of videos and imagery coming out of there. But I can tell you there are at least 100,000 displaced people outside, in on the outskirts of Beirut, refugees, internally displaced refugees. There's likely well over 1 million people in southern Lebanon that have been displaced since the Israelis kicked off this ground incursion. I don't fully know or grasp how deep the Israelis have penetrated on the ground yet, how many forces they're committing, but I would be shocked if this is over soon. And there's clearly an ongoing nationwide, as in across Lebanon, air campaign by the Israelis being waged, as well as indirect long-range fires throughout the country. A lot of firepower being directed at the capital of Beirut. And of course the Israelis continue to use displacement tactics, meaning they use non-kinetic and semi-kinetic means to force populations before they get there to have displaced themselves, into other parts of the nation or to spill over into other areas, clearing those zones out. And of course Hezbollah is hitting back. Don't think they're not. They're firing rockets and artillery back into Israel. So I wish I had more to say or a better sense of how the conflict's unfolding on the ground. As I have more of that, I'll certainly work them into these updates. I'll also note, though, the fact that the Israelis, having gone through all their decapitation strikes a couple years ago, which were stunning, right? A stunning success for Mossad, and their ability to do things like get explosives into all those radios, right, and blow them up. At the time, there were all these analysts who were like, this is it, Hezbollah's over. These decapitation strikes are so deep that it will be difficult to reconstitute those command and control structures. And who's gonna trust anybody? That was the thinking, right? If guy A got killed over here by the Israelis, but I'm still around and about to take charge of something within the Hezbollah structure, well, why am I still alive? Why didn't the Israelis find me? Am I a sellout? Well, I'm sure some of that did go on, but clearly the fact that the Israelis are back, they're doing a ground incursion, Hezbollah is still fighting back, says that just because you can find and target specific people, no matter how important those people are, and maybe target a lot of them, does not mean that you are going to fundamentally cripple your adversary. If anything, you run the risk of forcing it to adapt very rapidly and in ways that you cannot predict, or more importantly, are beyond the scope of your ability to really monitor or understand, right? As just like we talked about last time with Iran, right? As you pick apart the command and control structures of your opponent, those that remain will reconstitute and will change the way they operate, the structures, the natures of them, so that it becomes harder for the enemy attacking them to know how to go after them. This is clearly a textbook example of that. Despite all of that effort to take out all those leaders, Hezbollah has clearly reconstituted its command structures. It's probably become more robust. And let's not forget, every time you kill an elite, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's rich, right? Just the elites within a given society and within given power structures. The less of them there are, thus the less elite competition exists. And since the more elite competition you have, the more unstable organizations, institutions, nations, and society get. If you consolidate the elites, you are making it more likely that that organization becomes stronger, more resilient, much harder to take out. And you could almost just say that the Israelis, and we'll scale this up, the Americans, a lot of nations and organizations around the world have become addicted essentially to tactical and to some degree operational success. Meaning we all get really excited, all these people get really excited, when you can, and it is exciting in a sense to watch. I mean, the ability to put like a 250-pound, munition from way off through the window of your desired target and hit just that is very impressive. But in war, just being able to blow something up isn't really accomplishing anything. Like, you have to blow things up to move the political landscape to a point where you're going to get the outcome that you couldn't get by other means. And since clearly just killing elites doesn't do that, becoming obsessed with those victories and holding them up as signs of progress is at best foolish and at worst pretty dishonest, right? You cannot, we did this in the global war on terror, right? Every day you'd wait, it was like Groundhog Day. The global war on terror was like Groundhog Day at the Pentagon. Every day you'd hear about another high value target we had taken out, captured, what have you. And every day it didn't seem to change anything on the battleground. In fact, or on the battlefield. In fact, if anything, it just continued to make it worse. These adversaries adapted, they broke apart, they became harder to understand. But at the end of the day, they still remained and they still kept fighting. And in many ways, they won. Afghanistan, Iraq, okay, maybe not a total loss, but pretty close, right? So we're seeing this in Iran. We're seeing all of, every day, our favorite guy, everybody's favorite guy, Secretary Exef gets up there and talks about all the things we've blown up, all the systems we've taken, all the people in the top echelons we've destroyed, and yet they're still a threat. And really, more importantly, they still, too, as of right now, still have de facto control over the Strait of Hormuz. So all this killing and all this blowing up of critical military infrastructure, degradation of ISR and C2 assets and personnel does not seem to be translating into battlefield, while it's creating battlefield victories, is not translating into strategic victories. One might have hoped we would have learned something from the global war on terror about that. How, yes, it can be useful to kill or capture certain high-value targets or blow up certain kinds of infrastructure, radar sites, what have you, in support of prosecuting a campaign. But if that's kind of all you're doing, you're not gonna win. I guess unless your objective was just to blow those things up. If that's all you cared about, I guess good enough. But that's not really what we care about. We care about something bigger. There's some bigger strategic objectives always at play than just blow something up. But that's what we obsess over. Tactical victories, operational victories, right? We're addicted to them. And they make great headlines, they make great quotes. And it does, of course, I'm sure the people sitting in these conference rooms watching this footage and making decisions feel like they're doing something, that they're moving things down the line towards some sort of victory. In many cases, they're probably not. This is part of why we get, nations get stuck on the escalation ladder. You go and you conduct some sort of kinetic operation and it doesn't quite do what you wanted it to do. So you just think, okay, well, if we just go a little further, we kill 2 more targets, or we round up another this, or we blow up this facility, surely we'll get what we want. So you ratchet up. Doesn't work, you ratchet up. And pretty soon, it's like Vietnam. This is what happened to Johnson. He thought at every step of the way, all we had to do was escalate a little more, because our capacity, the United States' capacity, for escalation in Johnson and his advisors' eyes was infinite in relation to Vietnam. We could always keep going a little higher. At some point, we would escalate our way out of this. And that almost never works, but we get trapped in this, not just the United States. This happens all over the world. And has happened all throughout history. It's an easy trap to get sucked into. And we right now in Gulf War III are very much stuck on it. Which, then goes to really the meat of what we're gonna talk about here for a minute is the Strait. Like I said a moment ago, have said in previous episodes, is not a choke point at the moment. It is a checkpoint under Iranian control. It now appears the Iranians are really formalizing the rules around transit through the Strait. And again, the transit would be, and actually, look, I have a map up there, and you can see the Strait. You can actually see all the ships bottled up, not going through the Strait. So the Iranians have seemingly formalized some of the rules and policies, and are working to formalize them even more for ships to go in transit, not through the international part of the Strait, which you can't see the best in this map, I appreciate. But the bigger thing is, instead of going through the international part, they divert around through Iranian controlled waters and islands, presumably for some kind of inspection, verification that the ship is what it's supposed to be, etc. Those rules have now been expanded to also include ships going back into the Gulf, not just leaving with oil, but coming back into get filled back up. Well, I said it last video. You say it now. We now have to get the strait back. Trump has totally boxed himself in. In fact, they've now said this. The Pentagon and other administration officials said that this is what we're going to do. We're going to kick the strait back open, and we're already seeing the beginnings of that. The A-10 Warhogs, and the Apache gunships I mentioned last time. Those assets continue to be used on the southern flank of Iran and throughout the strait to try to interdict Iranian missiles, drones, boats, etc. Obviously, that's just the beginning of this, right? We're gonna really keep ramping this up. I do think the arrival and station of the Tripoli ARG will really signal, if not the beginning of really the big push to get the strait open. If it doesn't happen right then, it will probably happen not long after that. On the topic of ARGs real quick, it was also announced yesterday that in addition to the Tripoli, the USS Boxer and its amphibious ready group, which is home port in San Diego, is now transiting through the Indo-Pacific to join other assets already on station in the 5th Fleet Area Responsibility, CENTCOM Area Responsibility. They're probably about 3 weeks out, maybe a bit more, so they're not going to be there immediately. But just like the Tripoli, we're talking about 2,500 Marines embarked on board. In this case, they do have a well deck, so they can take advantage of both aerial assets, organic F-35Bs, rotary wing, etc. And they also have the ability to ship to shore from the back of the ship in their floating APCs, IFVs, rather. That's a lot of firepower that's coming on station. The Lincoln Strike Group Carrier Strike Group's already still there. We're seeing other assets flowing into the region. More and more E-2D Hawkeyes are being flown into the CENTCOM AOR, detached from a carrier, suggesting that we're expecting to see an increased tempo of air operations since the Hawkeye is a critical piece of airborne aerial command and control systems, right? They sit up there, they have a big spinning radar dish on the top, and they can see the battle space for a very, they can see a lot of the battle space, and thus can then coordinate and oversee the employment of friendly air power to the best effect possible, right? The Hawkeye could see an incoming Iranian jet and vector an F-18 off of the Lincoln to intercept it or something like that. We're also seeing F-18 Growlers being ferried across the Atlantic, across the Mediterranean into the area. These are F-18s that are optimized for electronic warfare, very capable aircraft. Again, the kind of thing you would want in theater in number if you think you're going to be prosecuting a high tempo, long duration operation over the Gulf. And as I said last time, this is going to be a long time. We have to maintain a pretty vigilant presence if this is going to work over the Strait and over the Gulf more broadly. Having a lot of airborne assets that can do EW and command and control are going to be critical to that. The Ford Carrier Strike Group, which has been participating in this, I just want to make a side note on, they've been called back to Soda Bay Fleet Activities Yard due to the fire that occurred last week on board in their laundry facilities. Huge fire, something like 400 or 600 sailors didn't have anywhere to sleep. They were in the hallways. So the Ford is going up there for maintenance for about a week. Its air wing has been deployed to air bases in theater, so they're still participating. And I thought, and I'm totally incorrect in this, that we had another Carrier Strike Group already in transit to relieve the Ford. That does not appear to be the case. It looks like the Ford, once it's patched up, is going to be sent right back into the Red Sea, maybe all the way out into the Indian Ocean where the Lincoln is, but probably will stay in the Red Sea to participate in the reopening of the Strait. I gotta say, I feel terrible for the men and women on board the Ford and its escort vessels. They've been out a long time. I think they've been out over 266 days. They stay out there a whole longer. They start setting records for longest deployments. Not only is this hard on crews, the men and women who actually serve on these ships, it's hard on the equipment. I promise you, we will find out that one of the leading reasons that laundry facility lit on fire was because of this prolonged deployment and the missed maintenance that the Ford was supposed to receive when it went back to its home port in Virginia. There's all kinds of problems that keeping ships out on long deployments way past when they're supposed to come back causes through the whole naval building maintenance ecosystem, which we could get into in another video. But I feel bad for them, I really do. For a time in war that we kind of chose, we really could have maybe done that a little better. But the Ford will probably stay in the fight once they're, patched up in Soda Bay. I want to talk now for a minute back to just getting the Strait open. What are we going to do with these ARGs? A lot of the talk in the media and some of what I was talking about last time was, you could use them to say take Karg Island, the primary oil export terminal for Iran, and try to hold it for some period of time as some kind of leverage or bargaining chip. There's a lot of issues that come with trying to do that, not the least of which you've got to get those ships and Marines either through aerial assets by flying over the Strait and the Gulf to the island, or you got to try to fight your way through with these ships and hopefully not lose them while doing that. And then once you're on the island, it's not that far off the coast of Iran. It's very exposed. You'd have to keep them supplied. You'd have to be able to rotate additional forces in and out. You'd have to have air defenses there. It'd be easy for the Iranians to launch harassing drone and other long-range strikes from shore, not to mention there's something like 8,000 people that live on this island, so you'd have to have sufficient force to manage that. I always say not maybe the best use of Marines and their fighting capability. Doesn't mean we won't do it. But here's what I actually think we're going to do with these guys. In getting ready for war with China, the Marines and the Navy have been playing around a lot with the idea of using the Marines to disperse firepower as widely through the Indo-Pacific as possible. Maybe not the whole Indo-Pacific, but throughout the battle space of the Pacific that we would find ourselves in with the war with China. The idea being that the Chinese have a good chance of knocking out many of our big main bases, say in Guam or in Okinawa, and if not fully knocking them out, heavily degrading their capabilities during the opening hours and days of war. A lot of our big surface combatants are at risk from things like hypersonic missiles and other means the Chinese could use to attack them. So if you can disperse the firepower throughout the battle space, put Marines on all these little islands, put them on smaller vessels like littoral combat ships, maybe even cargo vessels, and arm them with things that can be used to harass ships, to conduct ISR missions, right? There's all this wargaming that's been done where Marines deploy to a small island, set up a temporary airbase. They're refueling and rearming F-35s, operating out of there while also launching shore-to-ship anti-ship missiles. All of this is meant to make it harder for in this case, the Chinese, to find our forces and engage them. It adds a lot of risk into Chinese planning, meaning they've now got to be worried about not just finding, say, 1 or 2 carrier strike groups. They've got to be worried about Marines being on potentially hundreds of islands and other vessels that may not be obviously US Navy. Let's apply this to the Gulf. These Marines arrive on station. What can they start doing? Well, one thing they can start doing is they can start interdicting Iranian tankers and seizing them, which is kind of amazing we haven't been doing that yet, that Iranian tankers have been sailing around with oil and gas during this whole Gulf War III, and we haven't interdicted and seized any of them, considering all the tankers we seized that were Venezuelan. We're even apparently just announced that all oil that's already on Iranian tankers can now be sold. The sanctions are gone on that oil, which kind of just hurts your brain a little bit. If it just hurts the brain to hear things like that. It seems very, very dumb. And it seems dumb that we haven't been seizing these Iranian tankers that have been coming in and out of the Gulf this whole time. I think if we're gonna go seize the Strait, this is probably one of the things we're gonna have to start doing, because then it becomes a way to say, okay, yeah, you're the you might have turned the Strait you're on into your checkpoint, but guess what? Our vessels, carrier strike groups, our ARGs, the aerial assets we have that are playing around in the Indian Ocean, just outside the Gulf, just outside the Strait, well, they're also a checkpoint, right? You want to sail into the Strait, well, you've got to come through us. And while, you know, we're not dealing with a tiny little narrow waterway, the United States Navy does have the ability to project power across a broad swath of the ocean. So now we would have our own checkpoint. We could determine who gets to go in, who doesn't. See ships that are out of compliance with certain parameters, right? Put the political and economic pressure on them that way. Don't destroy oil infrastructure. And that, of course, would be combined with, you know, kinetic operations. So Marines could be used for that. You can also imagine the Marines doing things like maybe boarding certain vessels to provide armed security on board them, to provide eyes and ears on board them. You could imagine them deploying to Gulf states and some of their islands in the Gulf to provide eyes and ears in the Gulf, to provide anti-ship capability, anti-air capability. I think that's what we're gonna do. I think all this talk of us putting the Marines truly onto Iranian territory, like Kharg Island, is possible. I think it'd be a wild thing to watch. I think I'd be holding my breath the whole time. And I think it is of dubious strategic, operational, and tactical value. I think using the Marines and their ARG and the other naval and air assets we have in the region to disperse eyes and ears, the ISR capabilities, and disperse the firepower throughout the Gulf to make it much harder for the Iranians to exert control, to complicate their planning, is a much better use of this. And it also is probably, if this goes the way I'm thinking, is what the future of Gulf deployments for the United States will look like, since this is now going to be some kind of perpetual patrol to keep the Strait open, to make sure that ships can flow, that sailors aren't worried they're gonna get blown up. Having this kind of distributed security architecture would probably be one of the better ways to go about doing that. Essentially kind of playing an asymmetric game with the Iranians, right? Instead of necessarily just always utilizing our big strength, we play more like an enemy with less capability, more nimble, more agile. So that's what I think we're gonna do with all that. I also imagine they could be used to provide protection and potentially evacuation for all these mariners that are trapped in the Gulf. There's something like 20,000 mariners that are stuck on all these ships up in the Gulf. It's just terrible. It's just terrible. And you're getting reports of these ships running out of fresh water because the ports in the Gulf countries don't want them coming in because they don't want these tankers to be docked pierside and get attacked. You know, they're worried that the ship comes in, docks, is now a target for Iranian strikes. So we have like a floating humanitarian crisis unfolding. And there are American sailors there too. It's not just, you know, international folk, though all of them are suffering and it's horrible. And you could imagine that the Marines might be used to help relieve some of that. Okay, well, let's see if we've got any other big news to report. Nothing else really huge. I mean, the retasking of the Boxer is pretty big, and the getting ready to blow, you know, try to force the Strait open. That's all huge news right now. The retaliation by Iran against its neighbors and against its neighbors' oil and gas infrastructure does continue. And before we finish, I'll tack this on. I'll say, the more and more of this infrastructure gets destroyed, the longer it's gonna take to get this back online. I think Qatar is projecting it's gonna be 3 to 5 years to get that 17% of their gas field that's now offline back online. And the thing is, the more of these facilities that need maintenance and repairs and what have you from these attacks, the more demand on the supply for those parts, for that equipment, for those technicians and repair personnel and construction crews that know how to do this kind of work, the higher the demand for all that it gets, meaning it gets harder and harder and harder to get any of these projects done quickly. The cost on them will go up. So at some point you could imagine there'll be a tipping point if this goes on long enough where there's enough oil infrastructure degrading the Gulf that even when it reopens, it will be a long time before we're back to pre-Gulf War III output levels. The other thing waiting in the background is all these Gulf states, yeah, they're rich, but they're pretty dependent on that oil money flowing in constantly. And right now, very little is flowing in. At some point, we may start to see true fiscal crises in these Gulf states. And I'm not talking like 2 years out, I'm talking like a couple of months out. What that will mean, what that will lead to, I don't really know. I do suspect though that you're gonna see more and more interest by the Gulf states in somehow getting the Strait open, and that's probably gonna take more and more of them clamoring to cut a deal with Iran, and more of them clamoring and potentially even physically, kinetically getting on board with kicking the Strait back open. The problem though that they're always gonna come running into with the diplomatic solution is that as long as Israel is allowed to do whatever it wants and is not interested in cutting any deals with Iran ever, as we noted last time, they did blow up the negotiators last year that were trying to cut a deal with Trump, you can't end this crisis in the Gulf politically. Because, like I say, we could turn off the war and it wouldn't matter. Iran would still be being attacked by Israel, and Iran would continue to probably wage this asymmetric war of attrition against us, the United States and its neighbors. So it will be, if this is gonna happen, if we're gonna get the Strait open, it'll either be because we kinetically get it open and keep it open through a long, long commitment of forces and assets, or the Iranians get to keep it as a checkpoint and now they're running the show. Or something in between, which is probably where we're headed for the foreseeable future. Okay guys, well, this has been great. I hope you've enjoyed it. This has been the Land Commander Gulf War III update for March 21st. I'll have another video out in a day or two for sure. And I'm gonna keep my eyes on this thing in Lebanon. Hopefully we can get some better information out of there. Keep my eyes on the whole situation as best I can. I'm working on some more interesting imagery for the projector for some of the coming videos. Any and all feedback is always welcome. And as always, reach for the lasers and embrace the motherfucking lights, y'all. All right, see you next time.